Welcome to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast all about stories of safety leadership, presented by Dale Carnegie and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals.
Shelly, great opportunity today. We get to listen to and hear from somebody who started out in the forest of Western Canada, who has a great message for all of our listeners about safety. What's been your connection with her?
She has an amazing background, and I'm super excited for everyone to hear about it today. So Shannon and I met a few years ago in a professional/coaching type role, and it quickly turned into a personal friendship and someone that I realized, and I think everybody else will realize today, she's someone you want to be around and have in your hip pocket. And I think everyone's going to be pleasantly surprised at everything they could learn from her and hear from her today, as well as, like you mentioned, not too many people do we get to talk about that have come from the forestry industry in Canada.
So, Shannon, please tell us, let the folks know just a little bit about you, your background, and we're not going to do your whole life story, but what's been your pathway through safety?
Well, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about it, Merle, and it's kind of a different way of getting into things. As you guys said, I'm originally from Western Canada. That's where home is. And as a university student, like many Canadians, one of the calling occupations to make your money to get through that schooling is to go tree planting. And so tree planting, unlike in the States, I don't come across a lot of tree planters down here, but in Canada, I mean, you use that word and you will come across a united camaraderie across the country. But essentially,
what's that look like to be a tree planter?
So any timber company that's removing trees off the land has a responsibility to ensure that land is restocked. And so these companies hire literally armies of young kids. And by young kids, I mean 18 to 24 is the average age. They're typically in university, not all of them. Some of them are traveling. There are career planters out there, but they essentially get hired. They got brought in. They get sent out to these remote locations, and they restock these lands by hand. So the average tree planter walks anywhere from 6, 8, 10 to 12 miles a day. They carry, on average, 50 pounds around their waist. They bend over 2,500 to 3,500 times a day, and you get paid by the tree. And so when I started back in the early 90s or the late 80s, the tree price was anywhere from maybe 10 cents to 15 cents a tree. It's not a whole lot different these days. Not a whole lot different. When I started, I had there was a crew of 18 people. Our foreman had one pickup truck, a 3-seater straight cab truck. The 18 people rode in that. So if you were one of the 5 that got between the 2 doors, you were in the front seat, and the rest were in the back. And that same crew could get on a Honda 350 quad pulling a trailer.
Were your roads that going to your location smooth roads?
No, they were logging roads. So we lived in camps. So you took a tent out. They put up the cook shack. They put up what were sometimes called showers. They didn't necessarily always work. And typically the bathrooms or the porta potties were for show only. So, I mean, this is in the early days. And I don't want to make it sound terrible, but I mean, we thought it was great. It was an adventure. So after a couple of years of doing that and living in pretty rough conditions, my brother was planting for another company. He had a lot of negative experiences as well. We were sitting at home with my dad, who was a school teacher, who always had an entrepreneurial spirit. And my dad said, if those guys can do that up there, why can't we do it down here? And create an opportunity for kids so they don't have to go and do what you guys were doing up there, because we recognized it was dangerous. We weren't getting full pay. There was all kinds of issues. And so he went around and basically went to all the local timber companies and said, hey, here, we got an idea. We want to start a local company for local kids so they don't have to go and experience what you guys did. And Weyerhaeuser Canada, out of our local area, said, we like your idea. We're going to give you a shot. And so in 1991, with no knowledge of how to run a business or what to do, we had one old pickup truck and an old quad and 18 people that we had basically gathered up, and off we went.
So what was your first role in that new company?
Oh, gosh. Co-owner, supervisor, labor, whatever needed to be done. And I think anybody who's started a business understands those principles. You do everything and anything that needs to be done.
With all this physical activity and all this going on, what were the safety issues that crept up?
Well, Merle, we didn't necessarily see them that way at first, because what we were experiencing wasn't what we were experiencing maybe up north. But we had a lot of injuries. But they were soft tissue injuries, right? Oh, my back hurts, my knee hurts, my elbow hurts. I don't think I can plant today. And at that point, it was like, well, those are just body parts. Like, I mean, you don't see those injuries. I recognize like something like a back injury. I had a bias to it because I couldn't see the injury. So I'm thinking to myself, you're just trying to get out of work today. I shared with you earlier, there was one instance where an individual came to me and they had tendonitis so bad in their right wrist that their wrist was swollen to over 3 times its normal size. Like, I always equate it to, it looked like a small football. And they came up to me in camp. We were running our own camp, and they came up and they said, I don't think I can plant today. And my response to them was, well, you can use your left hand.
Oh, what a heart of compassion. I'm just, wow.
Yeah.
And what did they do?
That
left
was
hand?
Me. I don't remember, actually, but I probably held a grudge against them for some time afterwards. Terrible.
It's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
But what was you didn't know any different.
No.
I mean, you didn't know any different. What was your justification? What was your line of thinking there at that time about people, injuries, and getting things done?
Honestly, we had a contract to get done, and if we didn't get the contract done in the time with the quality, that we wouldn't get the contract again. And our opportunity to continue this business would not be there.
So you're here with us today, and knowing what I know about you, there had to have been some point that perspective changed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So when do you think that was?
So as I said, we started our company in 1991. In 1994, Weyerhaeuser came to us and they said, we can't let you continue working with us unless you have a safety program. So it wasn't because of our injury rates or anything like that. They had decided they were going on this journey to be world class. At that point, they were aligning themselves to a lot of the stuff, and DuPont was sort of at the lead in there. And so they had decided that they were going on this journey, and anybody and anyone who worked alongside them, meaning their contractors, were coming with them.
So what was the initial response of you, your brother, and your dad?
Yeah, because that was the 3 of us. So I got delegated to do the safety program, and the words that were used was, Shannon, well, I guess you're going to have to do it. Now, there were some other words used that we can't use on film, because the initial reaction, was, what do you mean? Like, I mean, we're doing great. We don't have the same conditions that the kids had when they worked up north. But my dad said, well, I guess you can do it because you're the girl and your handwriting is nicer.
Oh, you were qualified.
I was very qualified. And you have to remember, I was the person looking at the person with the injury saying, well, you can use your other hand. So this was a big thing put in front of me, but I took it on. And here's the thing, Weyerhaeuser was amazing. I mean, they brought us in on everything, training, we co-wrote procedures, like all this stuff that I wouldn't have had a clue how to do. We walked through it with them in partnership. And that's a big one for me today. So you had a coach
early on helping you figure out how to do it.
Had a coach that maybe didn't quite understand it either. So it was not that we were having things done to us. We were doing things jointly. We formed joint committees. We did all kinds of things. So there was I look at organizations even today and think, man, like I would have died to have had the opportunity that even the company that I work with now does in order to help prep people. But we just were meandering through. So it was a journey. I wrote a safety program that I equate to a long romance novel. Like it was long, it was wordy, it was by chapter. I would write this thing and print everybody off a copy. And what did everybody think of that? Well, they signed the last page and dated it and ripped it out and gave it to me. And then I found copies.
So you were
of
good,
the
right?
Safety
They
programs.
signed
but the safety programs were there on the truck
in the
floor,
trash can,
in the trash can, in the camp. And it was just, I was heartbroken for all the effort I put in.
But you learned something from that, though, at some point.
Yeah,
what did you learn from that?
Well, I learned that people only have a certain amount of willingness to go into it, and handing them a paper copy of something and asking for a signature wasn't going to do it. So that was probably one of the first things that really started to change.
So just because there was a signature, it doesn't mean there was commitment of the heart.
Oh gosh, no. It was a good starting point. You know, it wasn't long after that we had, so, I mean, I was right in this program, and I don't know that I had full support even within my family members in terms of, you know, it was still, hey, we're doing this, we're meeting compliance. And we had an event where we had a pickup truck, a 6-person pickup truck driving up a road one morning, dusty road, following, you know, we had a sort of a caravan going out. And the driver of that truck in dusty conditions felt a change in the softness of the road and realized they were probably close to the edge. Couldn't see anything. And when they came to a stop, the truck was on a hairpin corner. It was at about a 45-degree angle, leaned over the corner, and it was essentially down to a creek down below. And 6 kids had to pile out of that truck, very, very scared and it was in that moment that I think my dad realized that he was that close to having to go to 6 doors in our community and explain why their kids weren't coming home that night. And that was major.
You deal with a lot of safety organizations as a consultant now and working with them.
Yeah.
How often do you think the people overseeing an organization forget that idea? Would you just mention that just for a moment?
I don't know that they forget it. I think that sometimes we're so far from it. The further up you go, we get distanced from what's happening at the front and distracted and those things. And if we're not intentional about it on a daily basis, then that distance spreads.
Your father, though, and I guess your brother too, had like a moment where they saw, oh my, this could have been, so they made a willingness to start to change. How do people that are listening to this, they say, I know this could be happening out there. I know this could happen. How do they help their people in their organization to see what could be without just being the little boy who cries wolf?
I think you have to close the gap, for one. I think that you have to make an intentional effort to be out closer to the front in any context. You know, it's one of the challenges I think we see in a lot of organizations is it's easy to get away from it and justify it as I'm busy, or I have meetings, or I have this, or I have that. Even folks that are like one level up, we have to get them back out to the front so that they're also walking in the same ground and having the conversations with those individuals and asking them for their perspectives and seeing with your own eyes what is truly out there, what people, and listening to their stories of what they're dealing with and giving them that time and space.
So that goes along with the Carnegie principle of try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. Yeah. So if I could see things like what these folks are going through, or your father grasped it, that this is what could have happened to these dear folks, all of a sudden we start, if we forget about our point of view, what's theirs?
Yeah.
Huge difference.
Huge. Shift the lens.
So I know you've studied a lot about values-based leadership, and you got me thinking, do you think it's sometimes that they get so caught up in their everyday business that sometimes they forget about what their values really are?
I actually think it goes deeper than that, Shelly. I think, and I speak from my own experience, I didn't really get a good handle on what my values were. I couldn't name them until I went back in and did a full master program on it. And I mean, that wasn't that long ago. It was like 10 years ago. I don't think a lot of people can name their values or can identify what their values are. They haven't done the reflection that it takes to truly, truly understand that. Because one of the big things is once you do, and you can think organizational values, you can think personal values. They're it's the same context. When you realize that, I mean, I always equate it to sort of some of the sources of conflict that you may feel in recognizing that. But how do you flip that as well to the positive in terms of how do we run with these things? How do we support them? How do we continue moving? If you listen to a lot of the literature out there, the conversations going out there, people say, as an organization, when you truly understand, when you espouse your values and you live to your values and you hire and you bring people in that share those same values, that's your recipe to success.
That near miss
Mm-hmm.
transformed the thinking, redirected the thinking of your father, your family, of what went on. What started changing after that?
Well, the very first thing is we actually put a driver program in place. We weren't even on the injury side yet. We were on the driving side because at that point,
Proactive.
anybody who got into the truck first could be the driver. You know, it was as simple as that. And so, you know, the pre-trip, the post-trip, having accountability for that task. We developed things where we basically would take people out and vet them and talk about off-road driving because we were driving radio-controlled logging roads at the time. So, I mean, it was pretty critical. Distance, following distance, as I said, we recognized that, I mean, they were in a dust storm. You know, speeding, seat belts. You know, these were things that I can remember days when, you know, if you were on the paved road in the logging industry or the forest industry, as soon as you hit the gravel, you might hear 6 seat belts on click right then and there because it was more comfortable. It was bumpy. You didn't have the seat belt, you know, rubbing up against your neck. And so these sort of core principles were huge. But at the same time, we were still having huge injury rates because we were still damaging every part of people's body, every soft tissue we could damage. So, I mean, we had seasons where, I mean, it's a 3.5-month season to do a tree planting season, 2.5. We'd have 50 days lost to injury. We'd have seasons where trucks would not be full any one day on the season. People would be out.
So at what point did you start to make a switch there? What were some steps as you started? You got your driver issues under control, right direction.
We're going the right direction, yeah. Yeah, the injury part was, again, it was a real joint process along with Weyerhaeuser, along with some of the other planting companies in the area. We formed a committee. Weyerhaeuser sponsored Dr. Delia Roberts coming in from Selkirk College to do what ended up being called Fit to Plant. So did studies in terms of stress hormones in the blood, looking at shift schedules, looking at pre-season stretching and capacity building exercises. Like there were all those different things. We went into the field of nutrition, and we started. The biggest thing was educating our people so that they understood the earliest signs and symptoms of those injuries, and bringing them forward right away. Now we're talking about being willing to report. Mm-hmm. And there's another barrier right there. But when people could come in and say, ooh, like my wrist is not feeling great, we could take action on that. So we developed internal modified programs. All different things that allowed people to stay at work through it. We developed a program where at the beginning of the season, we actually staggered the entrance. It still is going today. I mean, the company's now 36 years old. So staggered the program. First day, you're only doing the hard work for 4 hours. Second day, 5, 6, 7. So, I mean, we went every direction, every corner, every stone unturned. We gave it a try, you know.
So I'm curious, you were a leader in this organization. You told us earlier your response when the one individual came in. Did you find that your response changed as you made this evolution? So what was your response when someone would come more proactively and start noticing the signs and symptoms after you made the shift?
It was dive in and get curious about it. I mean, I've got a background. I mean, I was a medic for quite a few years in industry, so I had an interest in this kind of stuff anyways. But, you know, just getting them to report, starting to talk to them about it, the pre-information we put out in terms of educating people, the awareness went up.
So it wasn't use the other hand.
It was not use the other hand. I'm quite proud to say that did not stick with me. No, it was get interested and let's get in front of this. Let's get out in front of this.
But think of the change that took place. It happened because the leader made a decision to be different. Before and after. Before, just use the other hand. Well, that probably rippled around to other people. Says, don't waste your time.
Don't even go to her.
Yeah, you'll get this kind of response compared to you taking the steps afterwards. Hey, tell me more. What can we do? And that's where the leader is the one.
Yeah.
That makes the difference. And Shannon, how much of that is not just in the actions, but in the attitude that the leader conveys to people. You've seen a lot of this where it's even if they don't act, just the attitude and the vibe that comes off.
Yeah. You're speaking to culture now, right? The attitudes, collective beliefs, attitudes, values, all of those things. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you can speak to behaviors on the regular, but it doesn't mean it's going to actually soak. Like, as you said, like, I mean, I can tell people anything I want, but if they don't believe it, there's that quote, people don't care that you know until they know that you care. I think that was one of the sort of the big transitions and understanding the support system. So, a lot of times, especially frontline leaders will come to you and say, this is great. I mean, I love all of this concept, but I can't do it because I don't have the support above me. And, I always reel that back and I say, okay, well, hang on a second here, because let's talk about two different things. There's things that you can control and there's things that you can't. And what you're telling me is you can't control the attitudes and beliefs and the actions of your leader, but that doesn't mean that you can't focus on yours. And, when you talk about frontline supervisors, these are the folks that have the greatest impact over what truly happens at the front line, at the field, in the workspace, where people have the greatest potential of not going home at the end of the day. So when you talk to them about that, and this is what I sort of realized here, because there was challenge within our organization. I was ahead of where my family members were, but it's that decision and that support that I had externally through at this time Weyerhaeuser and sort of that collective group to just keep growing. So I can only focus on my mindset. I can only focus on my activities. And that eventually shifts into that change in my own attitudes and beliefs.
It appears that sometimes some frontline leaders or middle managers get really so bent out of shape and uptight about, wow, those people above, what's wrong with them, that they forget that they have a powerful opportunity to model and influence without real authority.
Huge. And that seems to be a real buzzword right now, the influence versus authority. And I mean, that's the crux of it right there, Merle, is you have to make that decision. You have to sit in it, and you have to be willing to sweat that out sometimes without maybe the support that you hope or that you want.
So it sounds like you mentioned a little bit, you folks had a change of perspective about the people, how you viewed people. Mm-hmm. Would you talk about that some?
Well, I mean, I go back to where I started, and my people were workhorses. That's a terrible way to say it, but I mean, they were what was necessary to get the job done. And I can think back to times where at the end of the day, you would have to go unload all those boxes and they wouldn't get out of the truck to help. And that just compounded the, okay, well, you want to see what can happen as a result of that, to, moving past that, where it's such a collective team effort that you're working together, and it's more about the team than the hard work. It's more about the community. I think about that in that industry and a lot of industries, and you talk about why people stay with organizations, and they say they'll leave an organization because of the leader. Why do they stay? It's not money. Money doesn't top the list. It's that ability to be challenged. It's the sense of community. And that was the big one that really came through, the shared experience and what you do with it. So how, as a leader, do you basically build on that shared experience and support that shared experience within the organization?
There are people, though, who are listening right now who feel that tension and frustration. Well, I can't get my team to get with it. Come on, folks. And they feel like they're the Lone Ranger, mm-hmm. but they feel like for some reason, they can't pull those people. Mm-hmm. What words of encouragement could you give folks to think about to help them to build that team, not just be the boss, but to build that team? How could we help folks?
Gosh, I almost sound like a broken record, but get in there with them. Get in there with them. Don't do things to people. Get in with them and spend that time with them and be there in those conversations and look for those skill sets that they can develop. leadership or management or those first level supervisors typically get in as a rite of passage. I've been here this long. I've, back in the day, maybe you got hurt, stuff like that. But you think about it, and I ask in pretty much every session that I do, what was your experience moving into your first leadership role? And people just say, I might have outlasted others or been here enough, or, so how do we get people prepared for that? I ask in everyone, how many people have ever been given any sort of training and feedback? Okay. The answers in the rooms is typically 10%. You go to the senior level, you ask the same question, it's not that much higher. So you think about the skills that are necessary for these folks to be able to do well in their jobs. It's not a personality contest. It's what can they do? And how do they feel empowered to do that? And how do we build the confidence of those folks so that they feel confident going out there, having maybe tough conversations, looking at the effectiveness of a team? What does a high-powered team look like? Do they know? Can they talk to that?
Now, there are people who are listening who says, I'm busted. I don't know how, nobody ever taught me about feedback. Nobody ever taught me. What would be some steps for people who are saying, I need to get better at that. I need to get my game going the right direction?
I mean, I think some of the biggest things that I always say is emotion plays no part in it. So, and that's, especially when we're giving what we call guidance feedback or corrective feedback, is often, and I just talked to a leader that I'm coaching recently, and his own self-reflective journey is that I'm getting a whole lot better, but man, when something really goes wrong, I recognize emotion comes in really quick. I said to him, emotion, like you wouldn't even put that word on the table 6 months ago. So being able to recognize that, but what does it look like? I mean, you have to keep it specific. I noticed. Here's what I noticed. And when you can put that on the table, let's keep this really simple, because we did one before. Merle, I noticed that you're standing on the top rung of a ladder. There it is, plain and simple. You can't battle it. I'm not putting judgment in it.
And so it's not like you said it I just heard you say, you didn't say it condemningly.
Or we have a rule that you can't stand on.
Yeah. Or you're gonna hurt yourself, which is now a judgment or a perception.
Didn't you hear me talk about that in the meeting?
That's right. All of those things. All of those things.
So you start out with that observation.
Yeah. And then I think one of the big principles is, how do you connect them to that? So I have to go back to that conversation about the caring. Hey, so listen, so think about that. If you're standing on the top rung of the ladder, like what could go wrong here? What's the worst case that could happen?
And what you just did there, you asked questions. You just didn't
tell them.
You didn't just, be the prophet of doom. You just ask a question. What is that? Because Carnegie said, ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Why is that so effective?
Well, I think there's a piece, and I mean, you could argue this word, it sounds almost kind of serious. There's an accountability part. That person has to take some onus for their own behavior. All right, they've got to think about it. But deeper than that, it's that connection. Here's what I find is people don't want to put the words out when they're in the wrong. They don't. It's, you even when you're talking about injury, what could happen here? Well, I could get hurt. Well, how hurt? Bad hurt. How bad? Real bad. They don't want to say it. And I think what I find is when you're in the field with people and they're in a position that really could have caused them harm and they're beating around the bush, it's not until they actually say, I could have lost a hand. Now you watch and you listen to that energy change in their body, and it hits them differently. They own it differently. And I can tell them 5,000 times that they could lose a hand doing this, or a finger doing this, or their life doing this. It's not the same as them turning around and saying, I could have lost my life. That resonates differently. I don't know what the science is behind it, but I know what the realistic impact of it is. I see it.
It's almost the difference between you're right compared to, oh, that's right. And again, to go back to Carnegie principle, he said, arouse in the other person an eager want. Rather than just telling them, help them find out what they need, find out that want to within them, arouse that, rather than just being the commander.
Yeah.
is telling everybody.
Yeah. Once that comes out on the table, now we're in a conversation. And now as the leader, you've got the opportunity to decide what that conversation is going to look like. Right? Okay. You know, I want to acknowledge you for putting that on the table. Thank you, because you're correct. That would be the worst case scenario in here. So what's necessary to prevent it? What do you need to do differently going forward? It's still that personal accountability, and it's still that, hey, now I got to start talking through this even more.
So you're asking them how they can control their exposure and getting them to
Yeah.
think about it and respond versus just telling them again.
I always know my response, but my power is to withhold that. My power is to basically listen and see, are we aligned?
But wait, I'm the boss. Don't I get to tell everybody
Yeah.
what to do? I got power.
That's a traditional management model, Gee. Yeah, that's a traditional management model. Yeah. Yeah. We're beyond that. We need to be beyond
Well,
that.
we need to be
We need to be beyond that.
beyond it.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. But when we come out of those traditional practices, and that's all we've known, that's all we've seen, that's all we've experienced, it's very easy to go into that.
Oftentimes we've seen it that way, and so we think, well, this must be the way it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I hear you talking about the leader asking the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, in your opinion, how can leaders, young leaders, older leaders, how can they ask better questions or learn how to ask better questions?
You know, it's funny. I went back and did a certified executive coaching program for that sole purpose, Shelly. Till I was already 10 years into my own journey around inquiry and questions, and I was like, I'm going to do this because there's got to be some real secrets as to asking great questions. And I'm sitting on there, and a master coach. So I mean, these people are phenomenal. A master coach is on there, and he says, "Okay, we're going to do open-ended questions this afternoon." And I'm sitting there with my pen poised, and he says, "All right, so use what and how, and let's move on." And I threw my pen across the room. I was just like, it can't be that simple. It really can't. And yet I looked at my bookshelf, which I've been collecting books for years, which typically all say what and how. And there it was. And it's not that simple, but it starts that simple.
Yeah, it sounds like a simple start.
It's huge. And when you give that to people, and then you go into the field with them and watch them practice it, and it's not easy to just simply put in place, because we're so programmed, the why, or we have those leading passive aggressive questions. Don't you think you should do it this way? You know, there's some great resources out there. I mean, anything around questions, I think, should be on somebody's reading list. But by simply starting with those what and how questions and starting to train your brain, then all of a sudden now you can start getting deeper with those questions.
So back to the ladder example, could you give me an example of what that would look like if people are listening right now and wondering, okay, how would I put that into practice? My brain, I want to tell them, this, but how could I switch that to asking a question to get to that same answer, or get their light bulb to go off?
Shelly, I mean, I can't help but notice you standing on the top rung of that ladder, and I've got some concerns, and you're on the ground now. I'm not going to do this while they're standing on the ladder, but, listen, like, how could you get hurt doing that task that way? What could go wrong? What's the worst case? What's the thing that could prevent you from going home at the end of the day? How could that impact you? I mean, there's a ton of different things to get that person thinking about what the potential outcome could that be. And if they're still in resist mode at that point, then I've got this great, back pocket question, and I call it my what if question, because this allows me to step into the conversation and say, what if you got distracted, or you were leaning a little bit backwards to get that last fastener in there and lost your balance and came off that 6-foot ladder backwards onto this concrete ground? What's that looking like for you now? I'm still not giving it to them, but that little what if allows me to kind of put a plausible situation in there to start steering the conversation. And I'll be real honest. I mean, 15 years of practice kind of with this process, and I would say it's only about 1% of people who are still holding out at that point. If you stick with that conversation and work your way through that in a calm presence, and that the majority of people will come around to that conversation.
What is it about let's just clarify, because questions are such a powerful tool that many of our people overlook. They're there, but we somehow overlook it. What is the magic of the question?
Well, I mean, I think one of the big things is that if we are doing it sincerely, we are telling that person we are interested in them. If we are doing it sincerely, because you can see people who aren't. But people who step into it, even with awkwardness, can still be absolutely sincere. And I think that's one of the things that often holds us back is we don't feel comfortable doing it. And so I go in there and I call it the little duck feet under the water because, you want to always look calm, cool, and collected up above. Nobody knows what's going on underneath and your feet are just churning the water up. And there you are trying to spit through these questions. And I joke because I remember a stage where I say I sounded like a machine gun. I mean, it was just 52 questions with no time for anything in between. And people actually said to me, you ask really good questions, but you don't give us any chance to respond. That was my learning stage, right? That was me in learning mode. But yeah, I mean, it absolutely demonstrates that interest in people.
So we want to avoid having an interrogation. That doesn't go well.
You got to have to be
you got the
curious.
Spotlight.
Yeah.
So
curious.
That's the word.
Yeah, curious.
Would you talk for that meaningfulness of connecting the ability to ask questions to guide the conversation? Where does curiosity fit?
Well, I mean, I think I'll back up even one step because we pretty much live our lives by our own constructed mental models. That's kind of our path, and then you put our biases, our assumptions, all of our collective experiences in place, and that's the first thing we're battling. So the very first thing we have to do is pause those. And so when we do step into something, and I often will preface something with, I am curious. And that's my own prompt to myself from an intentional standpoint that, whoa, slow your roll, Shannon. Like, you've got a lot of stuff you think you want to say right now, but you need to slow this down and be willing. So when I can do that and I pause that, and now I get into that conversation and I'm not just willing to go the lateral what and hows, but now I'm willing to listen. So here's where that listening comes back in and follow that conversation down so that it actually grows legs. It's when we start getting those pauses in thinking, when people are actually in that thinking mode, that now we're getting to the good stuff. Because there's science out there that will tell you ask somebody a question, if somebody with authority goes in and asks a question, the very first response they're going to get, what do you think that's going to be most aligned with? You see, now I'm asking the questions. What do you think? If you as a leader ask one of your frontline folks,
I'm going to guess what you think they want to hear.
There it is, right there. I'm going to give you probably what I think you want, especially what's going to get you out of my hair
just
first.
To get you off my back.
Yeah.
And if the person fails to have that level of curiosity to go deeper, it's like, okay, I got the answer I want. Now we're cool.
And it was the answer I wanted. So we're aligned. Good to go. What'd you miss?
We miss the whole underneath the surface of what's going on, their motives, reasoning, and choice, our decision.
And our learning, if we're curious and really want to learn.
This is the stuff for me that I'm paying the most attention to right now when I'm in the field. It's really watching that dynamic of, are we actually pausing and then trying to get deeper? And it's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I'm finding. You go through all these trends, and maybe it's because it's the trend that's interesting to me right now. There's my own bias, right? But it's in that feedback from the leaders, from my colleagues, it's getting better at that listening. How do you follow that conversation? How do you look for that? Because the coolest part is when you walk away from a situation and somebody says, I had no idea. I've never heard that. I can remember working with you in your organization, walking away from leaders who said, I've been here 25 years. I've never heard that before. Man.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it doesn't happen every time.
Right.
But it's like the lottery when it does happen. And maybe not the big jackpot, but how about some scratch and wins? They come up more frequently. So when you get that frequency of people going, unexpected, didn't expect to hear that. Man, it's like cha-ching.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
For those that are listening right now who have been used to this, I talk, they listen, I tell, they do, or I should say, I tell, they nod, but they don't do. what question would you ask the listener to help them consider a different way? Phew, that's kind of a setup.
Well, I don't know. Like, my brain's in overtime right now. What would I ask the listener?
Or what advice would you give? Or if you can do it through a question, or because I know there are people listening that says, I see it. I know I need to adjust, and we could really help people here.
And it's easier for me to just tell him. I can just tell him.
Yeah.
That's quicker. We only have so many hours a minute.
Plus, I know more than them, and we get caught in that trap too.
Yeah. Well, it's like what's in your way. It really is, and I know if I went back and self-reflected on it, I was in my way. It was my own confidence level in taking on and trying something new and different, because it's hard and it's uncomfortable and it doesn't flow the way that you think it should. And you go out there and you say to people, like, how do we get engagement? Open-ended questions. Okay. And then they go out there and it's like, okay, so let's see it. And can't do it. In a lot of cases, just it's not natural. So we say the word open-ended questions, but we can't make the connection to what that actually looks like or sounds like in the field. And it's that distance in there. And so I go in and it doesn't feel comfortable, or I think I messed up, or there was a lot of ums and ahs, or I don't get the responses. And then I say, and this talks to sort of a novice level in a competency model, but it's like, okay, well, I tried that. That didn't work. I better go back to what I know does. And so how do you push through?
There's a question that's such a cliche that really does fit here, of good old Dr. Phil. Well, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And we don't like that.
Yeah.
But for the people who've done it now and they feel frustrated, they feel trapped, they're like, I'm stale, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm trying this. Perhaps it's time to slow down and work not to be the big talker.
Yeah. My favorite overused word right now is be intentional. It's, what does that intentionality look like? We talk about listening. I'll challenge leaders, go into a meeting with the sole purpose to listen. To take yourself out of the conversation, to trust, to hold your people capable, right? To hold your people capable and to simply listen. And it goes to that other phrase that I shared with you about feeling seen, heard, and understood.
So I love that, hold your people capable. Tell me a little bit more about that.
When people enter organizations or enter new roles or get promoted, they've gone through somewhat of a vetting process. So their education, their knowledge, their skill is, you've trusted them to put them in this role, but then we don't trust them to elicit their feedback and their take into things. And, I'm talking in generalities, of course. I know there's pockets all over the place, but when you look at some of the real key things that show up when you go into organizations, that's a big one. So holding somebody capable is believing that they have within them the ability to get to where you need them to get to. And as your role as their leader, if we can take more of a, say, coach approach in that process and truly tap into that capability and help build that and develop them from an appreciative, rather than you didn't do this, what's it going to take to get here, are huge pieces of creating that journey. Because, we talked about it earlier before. It's not the destination, it's the journey to get there.
Well, what you're saying here really does fit with another principle of Carnegie, to give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Now, sometimes we look at that and think, well, I just see you could be this, you could be this, and that's good. But what you've just described is, we are giving a reputation to people, the way we ask the question, the way we pause, the way we listen, for them to be able to express and come to the conclusions of where they need to be, rather than us. We're giving them that reputation and that opportunity, which what we're really hearing here is we're really developing people when we're, I like your expression on that. You probably needed to go into that a little bit more.
I go back, I never forget hearing this. It was actually Simon Sinek talking about hard skills and soft skills. And he said, we have these conversations about hard skills and soft skills, and we talk about the hard skills and we talk about the soft skills, and soft skills sounds terrible. These are people skills, and so I brought that into my own conversations. I mean, we're developing people. What's a good person? Because a good person makes even a better leader. So,
and how are you developing people with the folks, the frontline workers on the field? It's not just do these rules, be safe, do that. What would happen, Shannon, if we took a different approach that I'm just not the rule enforcer? My goal is to develop each individual. What would that look like?
Sky's the limit. I mean, really it is. When you have people who are confident, when you have people who feel that they have shared purpose, because that's what we're talking now. When we go back to the conversation where, as I said, people leave organizations for leaders, but what do they stay for? Part of that is that a sense of achievement, that sense of purpose, that sense of being challenged. Not everybody thinks of going to the next role as being challenged, but how do I basically, build myself out in the role that I'm in? So, I mean, those factors, being capable, being seen to be capable, being seen, heard, and understood, I mean, that just builds a community, and we mentioned community earlier. When you have sense of community in an organization and a shared purpose, shared vision, shared values, I mean, that's the recipe for success. When you look at top achieving businesses in the world, listen to their leaders. This is what they're telling you. These are huge.
As we wrap up, lots of things. What is one thing you'd like to share with the listeners just to wrap it up?
I would say, I mean, it comes down to that one thing. Be intentional. Be willing as a leader to take your leadership journey to the next level by focusing on something that you can put in front of you. You can share it with others. You can ask for feedback. You can step into it. And that vulnerability that you put out there to show people that you are on that growth journey, I think that is really powerful. I had a leader come up last week. I was in the field and he came up to us and he said, "Thank you for making my leaders better. For the first time ever, they're asking for my opinion."
And that's the goal. Helping people be better, developing the people we work with.
Absolutely.
Shannon, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shelly, and thank you, Merle. Much appreciated.
Shelly, this will be a podcast that people may have to listen to more than once because there's a lot of depth. So many good things. What was one thing that stood out to you?
I agree with you, Merle. So many great nuggets that you probably will need to press the rewind button and go back and take some notes and listen again. One of the amazing things that I think Shannon talked about that we all can put into play is really being intentional, number one, and also being intentional about listening more and telling less.
Just to build on that then, her power of using questions and realizing that questions are such a great, necessary tool that leads to conversations and not just me telling people
Absolutely.
what to do.
And she gave us some great examples of, by simply starting with what and how questions, any of us can start there and really shift the conversation and what that can look like.
Wisdom for all the safety professionals listening. Great stuff.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast produced in partnership by Dale Carnegie and BCSP, with your hosts Dale Carnegie Master Trainer Merle Heckman and Shelly Baber, EHS Director of Electrical Engineering Services and Systems Division at Eaton. Executive produced by Nathan Wilson. Produced by Joel Burgai. Directed by Giachi Liu. Edited by Jared Griot and Kyla Anderson. Editorial support from Brandon Mohaupt. Social media support from Braylon Morgan and Crystal Keithley. Consulting producers are Colin Brown and Mark Sullivan. To have new episodes delivered directly to you, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. If you'd like to share your story of a safety leadership challenge you've faced, email us at info@mybigsafetychallenge.com. See you next time.